All jury members are present and accounted for, Judge.
Welcome back, colleagues. We
Please be
are
seated.
going to continue with the state's direct examination of Mr. Driskell.
Can you see that, Mr. Driskell?
I can.
Okay. This is my question. Was the defendant worth 2.5 times his wife's estate in April of 2017?
In April of 2017?
Correct.
So he would have already acquired some of her assets and...
You don't get to ask questions back. If you're able to answer that question,
Well,
you can
I
say
understand what he said, so let me see if I can rephrase it. In your analysis that you shared with the jurors, did you make adjustments for the defendant's net worth after his wife's death?
Yes.
Okay. And is one of the things you looked at the February 2017 personal financial statement?
Yes.
Okay. And so after the date of death, were there assets that the defendant had on his personal financial statement that included assets he would have received from his wife after her death?
Yes.
And did you make adjustments to the defendant's net worth with respect to those assets, kind of reflecting back to the date of death?
I did, yes.
Okay. And when you made that adjustment, do you recall, and you can refer to the PowerPoint if you need to, your opinion with respect to the defendant's net worth as compared to Ms. McIver's net worth?
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors what opinion do you have about that?
Mr. McIver's net worth was approximately $1.7 million. And the value of Mrs. McIver's estate was somewhere between 3.7 and 4.6 million.
Okay. And does that adjustment reflect back to the date of death?
It does, yes.
So as of September 26, 2016, can you tell the jury was the defendant worth 2.5 times his wife's estate?
No.
Okay. Let me show you a document. This is for identification purposes, Judge. State's Exhibit 480.
480.
480.
Okay.
Can you tell the jury, did you receive that document at any time during your analysis? Do you recognize it as something you would have received?
I probably did receive this, but if I did, it's been a long time since I've looked at it.
Okay, okay.
I don't have direct recollection
Okay.
of looking at it in the past.
Very well. That's fine. I'll withdraw it. And can I have just your testimony binder, does it have any personal markings or anything in it?
This copy?
Yes, that copy.
It has markings in it, yes.
They're your personal markings.
Or either mine or people on my staff, yes.
Okay. We have a copy that is totally unmarked. Is that correct? That you provided to us?
Yes.
All right. Let me just have you flip through it just to ensure that there are no personal markings within that testimony binder. I'd just like to introduce a copy and make it a part of the record.
I have not made any personal markings in the one paper.
And the markings in this one, they're fine, as is. I mean, this is to help whoever wanted to look at it understand where my numbers came from.
Okay.
So,
And by personal markings, I mean like any notes or any
Oh.
extra commentary.
no, nothing like that.
The markings that you're talking about, what are they?
They're tick and tie procedures to show where numbers came from and where numbers go in the book to help somebody like me quickly refer to a number and not have to spend a lot of time flipping pages to answer questions.
Okay. I'm going to mark this as State's Exhibit 488, Judge.
Okay.
Testimony binder. And just introduce it into the record.
Any objection to making 488, the testimony binder, part of the record?
No.
Okay, it's in it.
All right. And let me just check my staff just real quick. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Driskell. That's all my questions, Judge.
All right, Ms. Clark-Paul?
Good afternoon, Mr. Driskell.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
I am doing okay. I think I tried to contact you maybe a few times before today. Is that right?
You did, and I didn't call you back.
Okay.
It's my fault. I checked with the state, and they said you're absolutely free to talk to anyone on the fence side. The problem is, at that point in time, I was still working, and what I didn't want to do was tell you something that was incomplete or that might change. That's the reason I didn't call you back. It wasn't that I was being obstinate or not sociable.
Okay, so I shouldn't take it personally.
No, you should not take it personally.
All right. So I think what I will do is maybe ask you kind of a few specific questions and then go back and kind of start with some generic things I want to make sure I understand. On your demonstrative presentation, the last page, well,
Hold on 1 second.
Here's a clean copy.
yeah, oh, okay.
Something's happening. up
This is
there.
off. Can we turn this off?
Sure, was it never on? I'm not coming at you.
I didn't turn it off.
Would you mind if I used, I'm gonna put this on.
Oh, no, sure.
So you can see
As
it.
long as it's okay with them, it's okay with them.
I'll see you move.
Okay.
All right, so the last page, which has Mr. McIver's tax shelter per ranch at the top. I just want to make sure that I'm real clear on what this is for 2012, right? We've been over the 2012, you made an adjustment to that number to take out the $250,000 that was not farming income.
Correct.
Okay. But what actually happened in 2012 on Mr. McIver's tax returns is that a profit was reported.
That's correct.
Does that mean he paid taxes on that profit?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to keep this here for the moment because I may refer to it again. So, net worth, you told us, is something that's kind of a snapshot in time of what a person's net worth is, right?
Correct.
And the way we calculate net worth is we look at somebody's assets, right?
Yes.
And assets can be a variety of things, right?
Yes.
For example, an asset may be cash that you have in the bank.
Yes.
It may be property that you own.
Correct.
It may be a note receivable that you own.
Could be.
Okay, so if I loaned you money and you owe me money, on my net worth statement, I may reflect whatever the outstanding balance of that loan is as an asset.
If you reasonably expect to collect it, yes, it would absolutely be an asset.
All right? Cars may be an asset.
Yes.
Stocks might be an asset.
Yes.
Interest in a company might be an asset.
Yes.
Personal property you own may be an asset.
Yes.
Jewelry
Yes.
could be. And maybe some other things that you own that you could sell and get money for.
Correct.
But we're not done. When we're doing a net worth, we're not done with just looking at the assets, right? We've also got to look at somebody's liabilities,
Correct.
your debts that you owe.
Right.
So your debt that you owe may be your mortgage payment.
Yes.
It may be your car note.
Yes.
It may be a loan that you owe to somebody else.
Yes.
And you add those things together essentially to get somebody's net worth.
Correct.
Did I leave anything out? It's just assets plus minus liabilities?
Minus liabilities,
And hopefully you have a positive number.
hopefully.
All right. Could be a negative number.
Could certainly be a negative number.
Okay. So the first thing you told us about, I'm going to come back to net worth, but kind of the first thing we looked at, your first opinion, was kind of dealing with Mr. McIver's cash flow. Is that a fair way to say it?
I think so, yeah, cash flow position.
Okay. And what you told us in explaining your opinion is that his sources of cash was going down year over year from 2013, right?
Correct.
Okay. And part of his source of cash, in addition to everything else you told us, but part of it was coming from his wife, right?
Yes.
And she, won't belabor the numbers again, but the amount of money she kind of gives him goes down from 2013 to 2014 to 2015, but then it goes back up in 2016.
That's an accurate representation, yes.
And at the same time, you explained to us about how his salary is going down with his law firm, right?
Yes.
So at the same time that Miss McIver, Diane McIver, is giving Tex McIver money, he's also sending some money back to her, correct?
Yes.
In kind of three different ways. He pays money to Clay Management, right?
Right.
Which you told us is a company that she owns.
Yes.
And you saw that he was making payments on a loan where Clay Management loaned Tex McIver money. You remember?
The $350,000, yes.
Yes. He was making payments on that loan, right?
Yes.
That would be part of what is reflected in Mr. McIver's expenses to Clay Management, right?
That's correct.
He was also making payments to DSI,
Yes.
which you also told us is Diane McIver, right?
Yes.
And then there was just some transfers kind of to her personal or bank accounts that were in her name.
Yes.
Right. And we also see that from 2013 to 2016, Mr. McIver's uses of cash is decreasing.
Correct.
It's going from about $1 million in 2013, dropping every year to $342,000 in 2016.
Correct.
And it's not unusual for people as they approach retirement age to have to make some kind of adjustments to their lifestyle, adjustments meaning some kind of financial adjustments, right?
I suppose.
Okay. And if somebody is being fiscally responsible as your income goes down, hopefully you're figuring out a way to make your expenses go down too.
Presumably, yes.
Okay. And then we get to your analysis of the money that Diane McIver is giving to Tex McIver. And essentially what we see is that he's relying on money that he gets from his wife, right?
Relying on,
What's a different word that you would use?
he's receiving.
He's receiving it, and without the money he gets from his wife, for example, you showed us in 2016, without the money he gets from his wife, he's going to have negative cash on hand, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And he's getting, as you showed us before, not $1,000 here, $1,000 there. I mean, in 2013, he's netting $127,000 from Diane McIver.
Yes.
All right. So, Mr. McIver's salary is going down, you told us, right?
Yes.
Okay. His status at the firm is changing, and he's going to come to a point where he's no longer going to work at the firm, right?
Right.
And he either needs to, in order to meet his expenses, he's got to either A, earn more money somehow, right? That's one way he could meet his expenses, is going to get another job,
Yes.
okay? B, he could try to reduce his expenses, right?
Yes.
C, he could hope that his wife keeps on giving him money to meet his expenses, right?
Yes.
Okay. When Diane dies, that source of income from Diane to Tex McIver stops, right?
I suppose.
Well, I mean, did you see any transfers from Diane McIver to Tex McIver after she dies?
No.
Okay. And you told us he needs her income to meet his actual expenses, right? Because without that, he's going to be negative.
I'm not sure I used that terminology, but it would have been negative in 2016, yes.
Okay. And I thought I heard you say that you were not asked to really, well, did you look at Diane McIver's salary?
No.
Or her income?
No.
Okay, so you can't tell the jury how much money she was making in any year?
No.
Do you know if, well, is it fair to say that if she's giving Mr. McIver these various amounts that we see in these years, she was getting the cash from somewhere to transfer it to him?
I suppose she was getting it from somewhere, but I don't know the source.
Okay, fair enough. So let me talk about net worth and I guess start with Diane McIver. And I'm gonna give you your presentation back.
I forgot you took it.
I want to do a little bit of math. So I'm looking at page 21 of your presentation, and I'm not going to put it up on the screen because it's a little bit of a pie chart, but so I want to do Mrs. McIver. All right, so and I want to talk about what her assets were on the day of her death. So let me start with her cash on hand, which actually is on a different page. All right, so on page 17, you told us that she has $275,535 in cash, right?
Yes.
Does that include a money market account that she had? Is that what the $269,000 is?
I don't recall if it was a money market or a checking account.
Okay. All right, but cash on hand was $275,000, right?
Yes, and that's also on slide 21.
Okay. And then she has so this is cash on hand. And then she has a 401k, which is worth $288,059. That's what it was cashed out for, correct?
I believe that's right. I didn't have account statements for every month. I think that is the amount that was transferred to Mr. McIver.
Not $400,000, but $288,000.
Yes, that's the record. That's what the record showed.
Okay. So the life insurance policy, while Miss McIver is alive, well, let me step back. The life insurance policy that you referenced in her cash on hand, that's a life insurance policy where Tex McIver was named as the beneficiary.
Yes.
So that means when Diane dies, the life insurance policy is going to pay whatever the policy amount is to Mr. McIver, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
It does not go into Diane McIver's estate.
I don't know that.
Okay. while she is alive, what can she do with that life insurance policy?
While she's alive, it had cash value, so she could have cashed it out.
Okay, do you remember what the cash value was?
I'd be speculating.
Okay. But the money from the life insurance, she didn't cash it out, number one, right?
No.
And it goes, upon her death, it goes to Mr. McIver.
Yes.
Okay. Then we have, so I'm going to leave that out for the moment, but we can come back to that. All right, so then we have, she owns the condo, right?
Yes.
Which is $650,000.
Correct.
That's I'm going to call that the Buckhead condo to distinguish it from the Granville condo.
Okay.
And then, and some of these numbers on here, you didn't take steps to verify them. You just said, okay, this is the number that was reported to me and I'm going to use that, right?
Yes, it was reported by McIver's lawyers, so I assumed that they were accurate.
It was actually reported by somebody named Kirk Watkins, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and your understanding is Mr. McIver's lawyer?
That was my understanding, yes.
And that understanding is based on a conversation you had with the DA's office?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so then the ranch, you say, well, she has a half interest in the ranch because her and Mr. McIver own it together, right?
Correct.
So I'm going to give her half of the value of the ranch, which is $675,000.
Correct.
Okay. And then you say, well, I'm going to give her half the value of the household furnishings and art, right? Which is $100,000.
Yes.
Okay. And some jewelry. Well, let me see if we can't shortcut this a little bit. Other than me writing all these out, what do these numbers right here sum up to? Just
I don't know. I don't have a sum here. I'd have to get a calculator and do it. I don't know. I know that the total of these is this to this, but it's both of these. But I haven't created a subtotal.
Stop for a second.
When he says this to this,
Sure. What, if you could reference maybe the page, is this all PowerPoint?
so we're looking at page 21.
Okay.
We're looking at Ms. McIver's assets, everything listed under there,
Okay.
plus Clay Management's assets.
Okay.
So you're saying the numbers under Ms. McIver's assets, the number under Clay Management assets, plus her cash on hand?
No, the cash on hand is here.
Okay, so it's all in there?
It's all there.
All right, so these, I'll go show the state, those numbers total up to these two on page 22.
Yes.
Okay, let me just, that's a better way to do it. The two numbers from page 22 are 3.6 million on the low end to 4.6 million on the high end.
Rounded, the first number would be 3.7, but yes,
All
close
right,
enough.
I'll round it up, 7. And low and high, because in the document you got, for some of these items, there was a range of estimates, right?
That's correct.
Like for the furniture and fixtures, the low end of the estimate was $35,000.
That's right.
The high end of the estimate was $150,000, for example.
That's correct.
Okay. So these are her assets. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Then we've got to talk about her liabilities. And I didn't see her liabilities reflected on any of the slides in your presentation, right?
Correct.
Okay. But she had a liability of $975,000 to DRS Investments.
Yes.
Okay. So if we're going to do net worth, we got to factor in the $975,000.
Yes.
Okay. Since we're kind of dealing with round numbers, is it fair for me to say her net worth, her assets minus her liabilities, on the low end goes from 2.7 to the high end 3.6?
Well, that's not everything. I mean, my understanding is there's another insurance policy too.
Right, there's another
Yeah.
insurance policy for $1 million.
Yes.
Okay. That $1 million insurance policy, the beneficiary is DRS Investments.
I don't recall.
It's not Mr. McIver.
Pardon me?
It's not Mr. McIver.
It's not Mr. McIver, no.
And it's not the estate of Diane McIver.
I don't recall.
That life insurance policy, part of it ends up getting credited towards the $975,000. You saw that in a document you reviewed.
I believe so.
Okay. So half of it gets credited towards the $975,000, which would leave us with $475,000 in liability.
Okay.
I'm confused.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll lodge an objection because that question is not consistent with the evidence that's
That's
presented
exactly what Mr. Rickert testified to.
in this case.
Well, the jurors will remember what Mr. Rickert says. I suggest you check your notes as to what he said the amount was and what several other witnesses have said the amount was.
Mr. Brown as well.
And whether 975 is covered liability. That's why I'm confused. But this is your witness, and this witness knows only whatever it is he knows about the insurance policy, and so you can go back to it.
All right. You saw there was a claim, a demand for payment of $975,000 was made against the estate of Diane McIver, right? You saw that?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And that claim of $975,000 was settled, right?
That's my understanding.
Okay. And the way it was settled partially was by that $1 million insurance policy. And if there's a document that would refresh your recollection, I can show it to you.
I don't know what it would be.
Well, you looked at, part of the documents you looked at to prepare your report are, on page 5, you told us that you looked at the settlement agreement between DRS Investments, Richard Harrell, estate of Diane McIver, Claude McIver, William Corey, and U.S. Enterprises, right?
Yes.
Okay. So would looking at that document refresh your recollection as to how the $1 million policy was credited towards the $975,000 debt?
Possibly.
Okay.
Mr. Driskell, is that document, one that's in the testimony line, so we can all see it?
I don't believe so, no. No, I don't believe it's in here.
Can we have a quick sidebar before we go any further, please?
Recollection. You are entitled to read the entire thing. I would like to direct your attention to one part.
Mr. Rucker, you have a copy of what's on the screen here?
No.
Yes.
And then also, if you could read that paragraph as well.
This one?
Yes.
I don't know if you can read that long.
Printed copy here.
Okay.
All right, so does reading that refresh your recollection that the life insurance policy satisfied $500,000 of this $975,000 policy?
I recall reviewing and reading that document, yes.
And does that refresh your?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So, so would it be fair for me to so this would be fair for me to say, you know, kind of plus 500,000 and then it'll all net out at the end? You said I can't subtract the whole $1 million, right?
Right.
I can only subtract half of that.
I suppose, yes.
Well, I don't want you to suppose that. I want you to tell me if I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, I understand the math that you're doing.
Okay.
The reason that I didn't include those amounts is because, I didn't know if there were other agreements that had been made. The documents that I received from the lawyers did not include any liabilities. I mean, my understanding was that was their job to put together a list of assets and liabilities for Ms. McIver's estate. When they didn't include any listing of liabilities there, my assumption was that all of that had been taken care of in either agreements that I had seen or agreements that may not have been produced in this matter. That's the reason I didn't include it. If there's still a $500,000 obligation from the estate, then yes, it would be fair to subtract that from the assets. I don't know that that's true or not true.
But in part of reviewing your documents, you saw documents that made reference to the $975 claim that was made against the estate.
$1,000 claim, yes.
Yeah, sorry. What did I say?
It's $975.
Okay, thank you. And then you saw reference to the life insurance policy that you told us about. Okay. And so, just to be clear, the life insurance policy doesn't satisfy that entire $975,000.
That's what that agreement says, yes.
Okay, all right. And you said you followed the math that I'm doing. I'm going to write plus 500K for the life insurance. So now we're down to 3.2 on the low end and 4.1 on the high end?
That math works, yes.
Okay. And now I'm talking about the net worth of her, well, let me just leave it like that. Can I call this net worth, these numbers I've written down here?
Sure.
Okay. So, in looking at net worth, we can look at when Ms. McIver is alive, and then we can also look at the net worth of her estate, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and when we look at the net worth of her estate, you've got to factor in what her will says, right?
Yes.
Because she, in her will, listed out specific bequests and dollar amounts of money that she wanted to leave to people, right?
Yes.
Okay. And in her estate, she listed out specific bequests that total $350,000 that she wanted to leave to people, right?
I haven't looked at the will in a while, but I'll take your word for it if it says 350.
Is the will in your testimony binder?
No, it's not.
Okay. It's in evidence. I appreciate that you will take my word for it, but I would rather refer to the document that's in evidence. Okay, on page 2 of the 2006 will, of Ms. McIver's will, she leaves a total of $350,000 in specific bequests to people, right?
That's what it says, yeah.
Okay. And the $350,000 is less than the money she has in the bank on the day she dies, right?
That's correct.
Okay. You told us the money she has in the bank on the day she dies is $275,000, right?
That's right.
Okay. So to come up with $350,000, we've got to get money from somewhere else, other than what's in the bank.
Yes.
Okay. So let me talk about Mr. McIver's net worth now, and I want to do some different snapshots in time,
Okay.
which you've already done for us, but ask you some questions about them. One thing you looked at was his net worth prior to Diane's death, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you listed out on page 21 of your presentation some of the assets that he owned prior to her, or you listed out the assets that he owned prior to her death, right?
Yes.
On page 21. And these assets you told us you got from the personal financial statement that he prepared, or that was prepared with his name on it.
Yes.
In February 2017. What you told us was that prior to Diane's death, Mr. McIver's net worth didn't include things that property or money or whatever that he would have gotten upon her death, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you also told us that, well, I want to make sure I'm right. Your net worth calculation for Mr. McIver prior to Diane's death does not include whatever the value may be of his holdings in Arcilla.
I don't know whether if that financial statement or that statement of net worth that he produced includes monies for Arcilla or not.
But so you said, if I'm correct, the money that may be reflected in his net worth prior to her death related to Arcilla may be the notes receivable or the other assets, right?
That's possible. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. And you don't see reflected, and you didn't credit him with his net worth prior to Diane's death with having a value of $1.5 to $2.5 million in Arcilla.
No.
You just didn't include that.
Didn't include it.
Okay. And we looked at the letter from Ted Smith at Arcilla, correct?
Yes.
And you've never spoken to Mr. Smith?
No, I've not.
All right. You haven't asked him, hey, what did you mean when you wrote this letter, right?
No, I've not.
Okay. Just didn't include it in your calculation of Mr. McIver's net worth prior to Diane's death?
No, I did not.
So the total net worth for Mr. McIver that you calculated prior to Diane's death was $1.7 million.
Assuming that those other categories are correct, yes.
Okay. So if we added in the money from Arcilla, the 1.5 on the low end or the 2.5 on the high end, we get to $3.2 million on the low end?
If that's the value you attributed to Arcilla, then yes, that math would be accurate, yes.
Okay. And on the high end, it could be $4.2 million?
That sounds right.
Okay. It's getting close to lunch, so my brain's getting a little fuzzy. Probably would be a good idea to talk to Mr. Smith and say, hey, where did those numbers come from? What does it represent? How'd you come up with it, right?
Well, the document specifically said it wasn't an appraisal.
No, I understand what the document says, but if we wanted to find out, hey, what does Arcilla do? How did you calculate this number? Ted Smith probably would be a good person to talk to since he wrote the letter.
I suppose.
Okay. All you can tell us is just what the letter says.
That's correct.
Okay. So then you also calculated Mr. McIver's net worth after Diane's death, correct?
Yes.
And there are some assets that Mr. McIver owned that you then attributed to Mr. McIver's net worth.
Could you repeat that?
There are some assets that Diane owned before she died. And after she died, you said, okay, now I'm going to count these in Mr. McIver's net worth.
That's correct, yes.
Right. And you assumed that Mr. McIver would get all of Clay Management's assets.
Yes.
Okay. And what is that assumption based on?
Well, it was 100% owned by Mrs. McIver.
Okay. What's the next step? So when she dies, what happens? Why are you assuming that he takes over as owner or that he gets her assets?
Because he was executor of her estate.
Well, is it, okay, so it's fair to say that Clay Management, that those assets go to her estate, right?
Yes.
Okay. He as executor of her estate doesn't necessarily then become the owner of everything. Or is that your understanding of what an executor does?
That's not my area of expertise, so I would be talking out of turn.
Okay.
We've had someone cover that stuff for the jury.
Okay.
Good.
But I want to make sure I get this right. You're assuming that because Mr. McIver is the executor of Diane's estate, that he then gets to include Clay Management's assets as part of his net worth?
What I said was that as of the day after her death, he would have had access to all of those assets.
As executor?
Yes.
Okay. And when you say he has access to those assets, do you mean that he has the ability to spend them however he wants?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if he can spend it however he wants or not.
Well, if he can't, if the assets are owned by her estate, it's correct we could do a net worth of the value of her estate based on those assets, right?
Yes.
Okay. If they are owned by her estate, it doesn't necessarily mean that Mr. McIver as executor is free to spend those or treat those as his own assets. Am I right?
Well, I doesn't understand this stuff, so I'm going to need to go to a different area of this.
Well, I want to make sure I understand what he's saying because he's listed it as an asset of Mr. McIver's. Is an asset something that Mr. McIver can access?
Yes.
Is it something that he owns or has an interest in?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know if as executor of Diane's estate, he has an interest in Clay Management's assets?
If Mrs. McIver was 100% owner and he's the executor of the estate, my understanding is that as of the day after her death, he would have control over those assets.
Okay. But here's the distinction I'm trying to draw, and I want you to tell me if I'm right or wrong. Does he have control over them as Tex McIver, the individual, or does he have control over them as the executor of her estate?
That's getting to legal issues that I don't know the answer to.
Okay. Do you know whether he could use Clay Management's estates to pay off his own personal liabilities?
Could you repeat the question?
Do you know if he could, after Diane died, could he use Clay Management's assets to pay off his own liabilities?
Is this just, are we still in the same area, Judge?
The question is, does he know? Not does he understand it or tell the jury how it works? And if he doesn't know, he'll say that. If he does know,
I don't know.
Okay. By listing it as part of his net worth after Diane dies, aren't you listing it as an asset he can use to satisfy his liabilities?
No, I'm saying that as of the day after her death, those are the assets he controlled. And that's one of the definitions of an asset, is that he controls those assets. If there are other liabilities that are applicable to those, like you mentioned, that if he's required to make $350,000 worth of payments, then those would be legitimate liabilities that he would apply to those. But my understanding is that he was able to control those assets after the day after her death, the same way he was able to control the cash accounts.
Well, so do we need to add in the $350,000 on liabilities on slide 21?
I don't know. I don't know if that's a legal requirement for him to pay those as the executor or not. That's out of my area of expertise. If that's a legitimate liability as an accountant, then it would be, then you'd list it as a liability. But I don't know whether that's a legal requirement for him to pay those or not.
Okay. All right, so let me ask you a hypothetical then.
And the reason I'm saying that again is because the documents that the lawyers provided, they didn't list any of those as liabilities.
You can only, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you can only work off the information you have.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, so let me ask you a hypothetical then. Let's say, hypothetically, as executor of the estate, that Mr. McIver does not have access or does not have the ability to use Clay Management's assets to pay his own personal liabilities. You with me?
So he has no ability to control the assets at all.
Well, I'm asking, I think, specifically about can he use them to pay his liabilities?
I think you're asking me a legal question that I can't answer.
Well, when you say control an asset, what do you mean? I feel like we're not connecting, so I want to understand what you mean.
Well, let's say it's a bank account. Can you go and withdraw the money? Can you transfer the money to a different account in your name? That's control.
So
Can
let's
you
say...
sell it?
Okay, so let's say hypothetically, he is not allowed to take the money in the bank and transfer it to his own personal account. Okay? If he's not allowed to do that, does he have control over the asset?
Can he transfer it to another account that he can control?
So we're getting into an area.
Could you take a lunch break maybe, and then I might be able to get better cross-examination questions.
Why don't you explore other areas right now, and if we're not quite ready for the lunch break.
All right, so let me look at the personal financial statement for Mr. McIver. So okay, it says states 481. On 481, Mr. McIver listed jewelry of $150,000 as an asset, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you saw the same $150,000 number listed on a document that was provided to you as Diane McIver's assets.
Yes.
Okay. So are you assuming that he is referring to the same $150,000 of jewelry?
Yes.
Okay. So if hypothetically he is referring to some jewelry that he personally owns, that would be different from the $150,000 referenced on Diane's list of assets, correct?
Yes, but the documents that I received specifically reduced that $150,000 to zero, so I'm assuming it's the same. We're talking about the same jewelry.
Okay. So I'm asking you for my hypothetical. Assume that maybe he owns some of his own jewelry separate and apart from what Diane McIver owns. But you didn't get a list of here's all the jewelry that...
Oh, an itemized list? No, I did not.
You didn't get an itemized list of the jewelry that Mrs. McIver owned, correct?
No, I didn't.
You did not get a list of the itemized jewelry that Mr. McIver was talking about when he wrote down this $150,000.
No, I did not.
But you assume they're talking about the same collection of jewelry.
Well, that's what their spreadsheet said.
What spreadsheet?
The spreadsheet that were provided by the McIver's lawyers.
The one that lists Diane's assets?
Yes. It shows the reduction of the 150. It says that relates to the jewelry.
Is that, so I can make sure we're looking at the same document. Is that in your testimony binder? I think, is it under tab 7?
Yes, it's under tab 7, page 7.
No, my pages aren't numbered. Now look at what you're looking at.
It's this document right here. So the jewelry, 150, amount attributable to Diane, 150.
This spreadsheet, okay, now I'm following you. Thank you. So the date on this document is February 23rd, 2017, correct?
The net worth statement?
Yes.
Yes.
Which is after Diane died, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and on here, Mr. McIver is including some assets that he received after Diane died, correct?
Yes.
And we see reference to that, for example, where it says condo life estate, right?
Correct.
That's something that he received after Diane died.
Correct.
He attributes the entire value of the ranch as an asset that he owns, right?
Correct.
Because after she dies, he owns the entire ranch.
Yes.
Correct?
Well, that's my legal understanding of the process, yes.
Okay. And then you list his retirement plan on there of $1.2 million, right?
Yes.
And actually, the retirement plan number was a little bit higher, right?
The documents are confusing. There's a letter that was produced that said that it was, like later, it was 1.3 billion, 1.3 million. But like as of the date of death, the only statement that I have for the retirement account says it's 850,000. But then there's some other smaller accounts, the money gets transferred around. It's just really confusing. I've just given him credit for the 1.2 because I think that's probably in the ballpark.
Okay. And a retirement plan is something that a person has the ability to withdraw from before they retire, correct?
Before they retire?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
It may be subject to some kind of penalties or fines or taxes, right?
Yeah, they're usually pretty substantial too.
All right. But it's an asset that somebody could use to get money from, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that is something that he owned prior to Diane's death, right?
Yes.
That's not an asset that came from Diane.
No.
$1.2 million is more than $350,000, right?
Yes.
And then he's got some stocks on here, and you told us you didn't see any underlying documents related to the stocks, but he left it in there as an asset that he owns, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then he also lists on his liabilities, he lists the $350,000 note that is due to claim management, right?
Yes.
He lists that as being a liability even after Diane has died, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So this document has a total net worth number of $3.7 million. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. And that's the net worth, again, a snapshot in time on February 23rd, 2017, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And what your presentation says is that this 3.7 number is an overstatement, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Because you said it includes assets that are attributable to Diane, right?
No, not just because of that, that's part of it.
Okay.
There's a time, that's what I was trying to explain, there's a timing difference there too. I've changed the date, but that's not the reason that I said that it's overstated.
All right, so that's what I want to make sure I understand. As of you're not saying that as of February 23rd, 2017, that this number is wrong.
Well, no, I think parts of it are wrong in both dates.
Okay, but it's different from the value, his net worth on September 26, 2016.
Yes.
But there's nowhere that this document says, hey, this is Tex McIver's net worth for September 26, 2016.
No, I don't think that was the intent of the document.
The intent of the document was to reflect what was his net worth on February 23rd, 2017.
Yes.
Okay. And actually, as of February 23rd, 2017, you think that this document understates his net worth. You told us you recalculated his net worth after Diane died, right?
There was a couple of parts to that question. Can you repeat them?
So the first part is you calculated his net worth after Diane died.
Yes. Well, yes.
And you said his net worth after Diane died on the low end is $5.9 million.
That sounds right. Yes.
Okay. You think that this document understates his net worth? You told us you recalculated his net worth after Diane died, right?
There was a couple of parts to that question. Can you repeat them?
So the first part is you calculated his net worth after Diane died.
Yes. Well, yes.
And you said his net worth after Diane died on the low end is $5.9 million.
That sounds right. Yes.
Okay. So this number, 3.7, understates his net worth after Diane died.
If you look at it in totality, I guess that the answer to that question is yes.
Okay.
You just have different problems with it.
So let me ask you about Arcilla and the letter from Mr. Smith.
I also have that.
I can give you a copy. Actually, it's right here, but
Oh, okay. I was going to say I don't have it.
I'm going to put it on the outline. If you need me to hand it up to you, I absolutely will. So the date on the states 148, the date on the letter is December 5th, 2016.
Yes.
And the regarding line says it's regarding Claude Tex McIver's company interest in Kaolin Holdings, right?
Yes.
Do you know what Kaolin is?
No.
Okay, all right. Mr. Smith is writing this letter as president and CEO of Arcilla Mining and Land Company, LLC, and Arcilla Trucking Company, LLC, right?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. McIver, you see this in his tax returns. He has a company that's called Arcilla Resources Incorporated.
Yes.
And his company, Arcilla Resources Incorporated, they are actually named in the agreement where Ted Smith was buying out Mr. McIver's interests.
Yes, I believe Arcilla Resources held the interest in Arcilla Trucking and Mining.
Okay. And on the third paragraph down here, it says that Mr. Smith is providing I'm paraphrasing, so tell me if I'm paraphrasing right or wrong, a valuation of Mr. McIver's privately held current holdings for his minority shares. It actually says minority shares, correct?
Yes.
10% would be a minority share, right?
Yes.
Okay. And estimated mineral worth by inferred drilling on the 3 tracts that Mr. McIver has an interest in, right?
Yes.
You don't have any knowledge of Arcilla or Mr. Smith outside what's in this letter, correct?
No.
Okay. You don't know if Mr. Smith is referring to both the 10% that Mr. McIver owns in the company as well as additional holdings in some land that he has an interest in separately.
Don't answer yet.
Well, I think his previous answer was he didn't know anything about Mr. Smith outside the 4 corners of this document. So
So I'll give you one question, that goes beyond him saying, I just don't know.
You want to repeat?
Yeah, okay. Let me ask it this way. Are you assuming that the $1.5 to $2.5 million is referencing the value of that 10% minority share?
Yes.
Okay, so you are not assuming, if Mr. McIver, in addition to that, owns some holdings in some land with Mr. Smith, you are not factoring that into the 1.5 to 2.5 million dollars.
I'm not seeing any evidence that, he didn't include any land on any of his financial statements. So.
Right. So you're just,
My assumption would be that if there were land holdings, that it would be part of this Arcilla line of land interest that he had, since there were no separate land items listed in his financials.
okay, so I want to get real clear on that. You're assuming that if he owns some land, that is incorporated by the 10% minority share that he owns in Arcilla Mining and Land Company.
Oh, yes.
Okay. And so you told us that the 1.5 to 2.5 million dollars didn't match up with the purchase agreement that we see later on in January 2017.
Or any of the other correspondence between the parties.
Right. Because the other purchase agreement and correspondence talks about the 10% minority shares are being purchased for about $700,000.
Yes.
Okay, and then they're subtracting out from there some
Previous.
withdrawals of capital that Mr. McIver.
Yes.
Even the promise to pay that Arcilla made, they have a note, right? Arcilla said to Mr. McIver through his company, hey, we're going to promise to pay you 5 installments of whatever the number is.
I don't recall off the top of my head, but yes, 5 payments of X for 5 years.
Okay. Is the value of that promissory note, or those promise to make those payments, is that reflected in your Mr. McIver net worth calculations?
And I don't know whether it is or not. If it could be part of the notes receivable, I don't know.
Okay, and the notes receivable is the $50,000, right?
Was it in there another asset column too?
Yep, plus the 250?
Yes, there's a notes receivable of 50,000 and other assets of 250 could be included in there. I don't know.
Okay, so if we assume that it is included in there, that $300,000 is part of what Arcilla is promising to pay, there's still an additional $200,000 that Arcilla has promised to pay to Mr. McIver.
There were 5 payments of whatever the amount was. I don't recall what it is. So yes.
So yes, there's money on top of the $300,000 listed in notes and other assets.
No, I don't know whether that's the part of it. I don't know whether that's the receivable that he's expecting to collect from Ted Smith and Arcilla, or whether it's something different. I don't know. I don't have any backup for it.
Okay, so we have at least 2 possibilities. One possibility is the notes receivable and other assets is contemplating the payments from Arcilla, correct?
Correct.
And if that's one possibility, there's more than $300,000 that Arcilla has promised to pay.
Why? I don't understand when you say more than 300,000.
Because they're promising to pay the 5 payments of the total of $500,000.
I didn't think it was 500. No, here it is. It's on page 24 of my slides. It's 5 payments of $73,000. So that's $365,000. So that's the gross amount that Mr. McIver will receive over 5 years. But as I noted, the 365 is not really 365 because you're going to get it over a long period of time. It has to be discounted at some point.
What's the discount rate that you discounted?
I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, you'd have to come up with a weighted average cost of capital or something for Mr. McIver. That was certainly out of the scope of what I would do. It would be something less than $365,000.
But don't know how much less.
I'm not here, sitting here, I couldn't tell you how much less.
Okay, so that's one possibility. We said the other possibility is that these notes receivable and other assets is not including the money from Arcilla.
That's also possible.
So that would be an additional asset for Mr. McIver.
Yes.
Okay. On States Exhibit 297, This was the check dated October 19th, 2016
Yes.
that we went over. This money was transferred not into an account with the name Claude Tex McIver on it, correct?
I don't remember the name, but I believe it said it was I believe it was an estate, listed as an estate account.
Estate of Diane McIver?
Yes.
Okay. As opposed to going to Tex McIver to his personal account?
Yes.
Okay. So I was just asking you about Arcilla, and we talked about the purchase agreement where Arcilla was buying us 10% shares back from Mr. McIver.
Yes.
That purchase agreement happened in January of 2017.
It was dated January 1st, I believe, of 2017. I don't know when it was signed.
Right. And that was after Diane died, right?
Yes.
Okay. So before Diane died, or at the date of her death, Mr. McIver's net worth would include the value of the 10% holdings, right?
Theoretically, yes.
And at that point in time, it would not include anything about the promissory note for the 5 payments of $70,000 each, because that promissory note hadn't been created yet.
That's correct.
Okay. What would Mr. McIver list as the value for Arcilla on his net worth statement on the day of Diane's death?
How would it, the amount? No idea.
Would it be one of the numbers that's in your presentation? The $575,000 that's on page 24?
I don't know.
What would you have to know?
You need to value it and then value the minority interest.
Okay. The value of the company in the correspondence that you saw in January 17th, 2017, you saw the value of the company was $6.3 million.
That's what one party said, yes.
Okay. Did you see a different number from a different party?
I don't remember if there were any other, that might have been the only valuation listed. That might have been the only one, I'm sorry.
Okay. So 10% of $6.3 million is $630,000.
Yes.
Okay.
But that doesn't take the minority interest into consideration.
What would you have to do to take that into consideration?
You would find a valuation expert to tell you what the discount was. It would probably I know enough of business valuation to be dangerous, so to speak, but it could be up to 40%.
Okay. It'd be some number.
Some number, I don't know what it would be, but
We
it's
don't know
some
what it
number.
is. Okay.
Because he has no ability to control the company at 10%.
Okay.
Anything else?
I do, Your Honor. Look at your presentation up there. The numbers that you used to come up with the calculation for Miss McIver's net worth,
Yes.
you told us about the document you relied upon, the one that was provided by Kirk Watkins, right?
Yes.
Okay. Did you ever talk to Mr. Watkins to have an understanding of where those numbers come from?
I did not.
Okay. They were round numbers that were in that document, right? They were all kind of whole numbers, 150,000, 200,000 for the jewelry and the household furnishings and things like that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you don't know if those numbers, let's take the jewelry for example, you don't know if that number represents an estimation of what the jewelry is worth, or if it represents what it was actually sold for.
If it was actually sold, it would have been cash, right?
Correct. So what I'm saying is that the document that you looked at, you don't know where those numbers came from.
No, I would presume that they're all estimates of some sort.
Okay. And an estimate, just that, it's an estimate, right?
Yes.
Doesn't necessarily mean that that's exactly the value you're going to get for that item that you're estimating, correct?
Absolutely true.
Okay. So in particular with the furnishings and the jewelry, the wine collection and the art, it's possible that the actual money realized for those items is less than what the estimate is that's on the document you were provided.
That's possible, sure.
Okay. And if you receive less money for an asset that you've estimated, that would impact your net worth calculation, correct?
Yes.
Okay. It would make it lower if you receive less money than what you estimated it to be worth, right?
Yes. Well, the alternative is also true.
You're right, you might get more. Yes?
Yes.
And then your net worth would go up.
You may.
I am still on page 21 of your presentation, okay?
Okay.
All right. Let me ask you a hypothetical, okay?
Okay.
Assume with me that Mr. McIver does not have control over Clay Management's assets. Just make that assumption.
Okay.
If he doesn't have control over those assets, is it correct to take those out of his net worth calculation?
If he has no ability to control any of those assets, that's probably right.
Okay. And if we take Clay Management's assets out of the net worth calculation, the total of Clay Management's assets is very approximately just over $1 million on the low end.
About $1.1 million, looks like.
On the low
I mean,
end.
that's doing the math in my head, so it could be wrong. But that's close.
But then on the high end, if we add up just Clay Management's assets, now we're talking about $2 million, very, very roughly.
Rough numbers, yes.
Okay. So for Mr. McIver, if we assume hypothetically he doesn't control Clay Management's assets, on the low end, that takes his net worth down to $4.8 million. $5.9 minus the 1.14.
Yes.
And then on the high end, it would come down to $4.9 million
Yes.
if we take Clay Management out. And if we assume, another hypothetical, okay, assume that before Diane dies in September 2016, assume his assets does not include anything related to Arcilla, okay? In my hypothetical,
Okay.
all right? And in my hypothetical, assume that the value of his holdings in Arcilla is $1.5 million, right?
Okay.
Then we would come add the 1.5 down here to the 1.7, right?
Yes.
And we'd come up with 3.2, right? And if we're going along with my hypotheticals, the change in Mr. McIver's net worth is approximately $1.6 to $1.7 million.
Under all those assumptions and hypotheticals, yes.
Okay. So I know you provided us with a calculation of Mrs. McIver's net worth, correct? As of the date of her death.
Yes.
Okay. But you didn't do a separate calculation of the net worth of her estate after she died?
No, did not.
Okay. If we wanted to calculate the net worth of her estate after she died, we'd have to know her assets at the time of her death, for one, correct?
I've never prepared an estate, so I would be speculating as to the process of what you need to do.
Is there a separate process to value somebody's estate after they died?
I don't know, I've never done it.
Well, you've told us, though, just to calculate a net worth in general, we've got to know assets, right?
Yes.
Judges can ask and answer definition of net worth.
Well, this is true, but this witness has just said, I've never done it, I don't know how to do it, not my area. So let's not ask him about how that area might work.
Right, I'm not.
Okay?
All right, but you told us to calculate a net worth, you've got to know assets, right?
Yes.
You've got to know expenses, right?
Not expenses.
Or liabilities?
Yes.
Okay. And liabilities may be, we went through a lot of things. It may be, one thing that could be a liability is lawyer's fees that you have to pay, right?
If they've been incurred, they'd be a liability, yes.
If lawyer's fees are incurred, they would be a liability.
If they're due, and if they haven't happened yet, they wouldn't be a liability. If they're an anticipated expense, that's not a liability.
But if they've already happened, that'd be a liability.
And they haven't been paid.
Yes, yes. So, the question was the defendant worth 2.5 times his wife's estate. We don't know the answer to this. We don't know what her estate was worth. Right?
If there would be a difference between, I don't know what the difference between what the net worth statement that I calculated and if there would be a different value for the estate. Could be, I guess, hypothetically, I don't know.
Okay. So we can't definitively answer this question. What's the value of her estate? We don't know. You know the value of her net worth at the date of her death, but not
Yes.
the value of her estate. Fair?
I suppose that's fair.
Okay. So then this no here is not accurate.
If there's a difference between the value of the estate and net worth, yes. I don't know the answer to that.
Were you provided any bank accounts for the estate of Diane McIver?
I believe I have some minimal check copies.
Just checks as opposed to like a bank statement?
I think there were probably a few bad. It wasn't for a long period though, is I guess what I'm saying. If I do have, I think I have some or I've seen them, but I don't think it was a significant part of the document collection.
You listed on the net worth statement, for example, we saw the value of the condo being listed as $650,000. You just assumed, you just went with that number, correct, as opposed to looking to see, well,
You've covered this with him before, that he accepted the number and didn't talk with folks about what it's really worth.
so that was the jewelry and the furniture and the art, not on the condo.
The condo, there's an appraisal.
Right. Were you provided any documents that relate to the value that the condo was sold for?
No.
Okay. Or that the condo has been sold, were you provided with that information?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Going back to Mr. McIver's will, I don't have the state's exhibit number in front of me, but we will have it before.
Mr. Guy,
I have it, just I don't have the exhibit number.
it's 271.
Okay, this is copy of state's 271. under item 3, I looked at the bequest before, we went over that. Now I'm talking about different items in the will. Item 3A leaves, names Mr. McIver, correct?
Pardon me, say again?
Item 3A has Mr. McIver's name in it, correct?
Yes.
And talks about what she's leaving to Mr. McIver as it relates to the farm, right?
Yes.
Okay. 3B talks about the furniture, art, and furnishings inside the condo, correct?
Yes.
Okay. 3C talks about the wedding ring going to Mr. McIver.
Yes.
3D talks about the interest in DRS investments going to Mr. McIver, and if he doesn't survive her, then to Richard Harrell.
Yes.
Clay management is not mentioned in the will anywhere. If you need to look at the whole document, you can.
All right, we're going to break for lunch. We're going to sit and let this guy have to read the whole will book or something. So maybe during lunch you can do that. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll get you back here. Is 2:10 too soon? It's a little bit shorter than usual, but I think we're in at 5 today, 5-ish, a little before 5. So let's be back at 2:10, and we'll have to work through whether it says clay management in the will or not. Okay? Thank you. Don't talk about the case. It's supposed to be nice out now, so get some fresh air.
All rise for the jurors.
Sidebar during the earlier portion of cross-examination concerning the $975,000 obligation that Ms. McIver had to, DRS may have had to U.S. Enterprises, and I may be getting the technical details wrong, but the figure is the important part. Ms. Clark-Palmer helped me understand that there, in fact, are documents that I may not have picked up on during some of the earlier presentations that suggest that the insurance policy that we have heard about, the $1 million insurance policy that matches almost dollar for dollar this obligation, somehow wasn't used in full to meet that obligation that Ms. McIver had directly or through one of her corporate entities. And it was Ms. Clark-Palmer's belief that actually some assets had to be sold off to satisfy about half of that obligation, which is why she was exploring further with this witness and maybe with others. But we did have a sidebar about that because I had a different recollection on it. I wanted to make sure we weren't creating something that would just have to be cleaned up by recalling witnesses. Anything you want to add, Ms. Clark-Palmer, about that sidebar?
No, I mean, respectfully, the documents don't suggest that. That's what happened. That's what the documents say. It's what Mr. Rickard testified to.
Respectfully, I have a different recollection of what Mr. Rickard said. That's why we had the sidebar. Mr. Rucker, anything you want to get on the record concerning the sidebar?
I would just say the sidebar, I have a different recollection as well. Not only Mr. Rickard, but I thought we had testimony also from Mr. Brown regarding the same issue. And I do believe, in addition, there's been evidence that Ms. McIver owned DRS as a 50% shareholder along with Mr. Richard Harrell. And I believe what we heard was that the debt of $975 was satisfied by the $1 million key man insurance policy. So I'll just let the record speak for itself. That is what occurred at the sidebar.
Okay. Regardless of what occurred at the sidebar, the way I concluded it, I thought, was to say I better understand Ms. Clark-Palmer's perspective and that she should proceed as she saw fit. But I wanted to make sure we got the sidebar on the record. Anything from the state before we break for lunch? No. Ms. Clark-Palmer?
got out.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not court staff, I need you to exit the courtroom for us, please. The courtroom will open back up at 1:10.